Five, four, two. All right, well, we're back. So a little bit of a delay there. Apparently, this device wants to do a new update, and so I had to give in to it, apparently, in a way that I don't normally do to humans, so that we could get online. So thank you once again for joining me tonight. Finally, I'm starting to kind of get everything working the way I want it to. And before we get started tonight, I just wanted to talk about a couple of things that are bothering me. Yes, I know. I start every single broadcast with me complaining about something. But this is something that I think is pretty important, and I wanted to talk about it. I suppose if I didn't want to talk about it, I wouldn't be bringing it up. And so here we are. But before we go ahead, I am going to use my nifty, handy, dandy button here to ask you to subscribe. If you are enjoying the content that I'm providing, then please do subscribe. It does help. And I've actually had a couple of new subscribers just by virtue of doing these stupid rants or whatever you want to call it, and then with the music at the end of it. I didn't really actually set out to do it this way, but some people seem to be enjoying it, and I really appreciate it. And of course, in the live chat, you can always comment, and I will feature comments right burned in on the video stream. So this is actually kind of a fun thing that I'm able to do now, and it's very easy to do on this device. So again, if you like what you see so far, please do subscribe. I really do appreciate it. It really means a lot to me because, when you start out doing a live stream, you expect it to be at zero, and to start with, it often is at zero, but there are people watching, and I really appreciate it. And it really does mean quite a bit to me. So, again, please do subscribe, and I will spam you with this irritating red button throughout. So, one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit today is, as many of you who know me are aware, and as you may have surmised by virtue of the fact that often in broadcasts and sometimes on air, I am wearing this hoodie or these colors. I am a huge Syracuse Orange fan. I've been watching the Orange since I was a kid. I grew up actually not that far from the U.S. border, and I was actually not that far away from Syracuse. So I grew up in an area known as the Ottawa Valley. I now live in Saskatchewan. And so often what I would do is I would go down to a Syracuse Orange game. I've always been more of a, not that I don't love the NBA, I do, but I have always been a big college basketball fan. And I've been a Syracuse Orange fan since I was a kid. I used to play, even though I was not particularly athletically inclined as a kid. We apparently are going to a second camera here for some reason. We lost our signal. That's sort of the day it's been, I think. I'm going to just turn this guy back on. I'm not sure why we don't have power on this. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, unless something was pulled out. That's really weird. This is actually plugged in, so we should be beyond that at this point. But we are booting back up. So what I'll do is I'll just talk to this camera until I get back to the main camera, and the main camera goes back up, and I will continue where we started. Okay, we've got our main camera back up. So anyway, those of you that know me know I'm a huge Syracuse Orange fan, and although I didn't become athletically inclined until later on, until closer to college, I did play basketball fairly seriously when I was, a teenager, a tween, and I used to play 3-on-3. And I grew up in an area of the Ottawa Valley, not that far away from Almont, Ontario, which is the birthplace of Dr. James Naismith. And I was often playing there. And they used to do in the 90s, they used to do the Naismith 3-on-3. And I used to enjoy watching that, and I had some involvement kind of playing with some of the older teams and that sort of thing. So that's something that I really enjoyed, and I looked a little bit more like Goldberg from the Mighty Ducks movies at that time, but I could still move, and that was my one athletic accomplishment, if you want to call it that. So again, I was a big basketball fan, and I was a Syracuse fan dating back to that. Now, any of you who have ever gone to the Carrier Dome, it's an experience like nothing else. You know, it'll fit 50,000 people when it's at full capacity, which they do sometimes for particular games. And one of the things that, and this is where I'm going to kind of get into one of the things that really bugs me. And this is that, so the Syracuse college program, the basketball programming has been a pioneering program in a number of ways, and it was actually one of the earliest teams, one of the earliest NCAA teams, organizations to have a women's basketball team. And I have long been a huge fan of women's basketball. I mean, I watch obviously the men's basketball, but I also watch the women's basketball. And in a lot of ways, and this is no disrespect to the guys, in a lot of ways, the women's teams play, in my view, a better form of basketball. It is a more surgically played game. It is a more strategically played game, and it is a more tactically played game. And in a lot of ways, the game is, I don't know if I would say that I would call the game rougher per se, but what I would say is that there's a certain energy that you get, and I would say that it's a more not intelligently played game, but it's a more cerebrally played game, and it's also a more physically played game. So you have certainly the players. You're still going to have a height advantage. You still have to not have to be tall, but being tall helps. And certainly, and I've had the good fortune to go down, and I'm going to actually play a clip in a minute, actually, so you can kind of see one of the fun things that happened when we were filming with the Syracuse Orange for an episode that we did for Go Nitro. But I always enjoyed going down to the games because, strictly speaking, as if there's such a thing, an academic of basketball or a student of basketball, if you will, if you are trying to see effective use of strategies, strategic pick and rolls, and just baseline stuff that you get in basketball, I don't think that you can go wrong with the Syracuse WBB. They have some of the best players around. And of course, not long after we finished filming the episode of Go Nitro, both Brittany Sykes, who's of course gone on to be, and rightfully so, a superstar in the WNBA, so too has Alexis Peterson, and she also went on to be drafted in the WNBA, and the both of them played in Europe. So both of these are exceptional basketball players, both of them guards, and they're unbelievable, and as well they should be. You look at the footwork, you look at the precision, and the decisions that are made on the court, and this is one of the things that I like about women's basketball. But one of the things that really bothers me, and this has bothered me for a long time, is that for the longest time you couldn't actually even watch any of the collegiate women's basketball on TV. Now, if I had my way, we would all be going and seeing our basketball games live. I mean, in a perfect world, we would all be going down to the Loud House and screaming our heads off and cheering on our favorite player and the team in general, right? Because orange collar and all that. But regardless of what team you follow, it, when you want to be able to support your team as much as possible, and it's not always possible to go and see your favorite team. Sometimes you're working, sometimes you live really far away. Now, I was fortunate enough that if I wanted to, I could go down and I could get tickets and see the games, which I really enjoyed. But if I couldn't see the games, then I wanted to be able to watch it on television. So you could watch it on ESPN, or FS1, or what was then Versus and is now NBC Sportsnet, or any of the regional former Fox affiliate stations, which are now Bally branded stations. So TV is an important component. TV is an important component for sports for a couple of reasons, and You might say, well, Corey, yeah, of course you'd say that because you're a TV producer and you're doing a syndicated show for a lot of these networks. That is true. That is very true. But when you talk about the economics of stadium sports, be it basketball, be it football, be it hockey, be it lacrosse, whatever the sport in question that you tend to root for, I think what a lot of people don't realize is the expense that goes into basically putting these games on, the facilities, the back end, and all of the various things that go into keeping the team going, keeping the motor running. And that takes money. And ticket sales are a very small, well, not a small part of it, but ticket sales drive not as much of a portion that you would think. The dollars and the increased cost, if you want to call it that, of tickets in the last 20, 30 years is largely driven with television. Television, and by extension, you know what? I consider television not just old school boob tube. I consider television and online streaming anything that involves you sitting down, whether it be appointment or otherwise. To me, that's TV, right? If you have content that is being pushed to you, that to me is television. So I consider, a lot of people don't, but I consider Amazon Prime television. I consider Netflix television. I consider Disney Plus television. I consider Paramount Plus television. All of these services give content by subscription or otherwise, and you are sitting there and you are consuming the content. To me, I consider television an all encompassing term to cover all the screens that push content at you. But semantics aside, and however you want to split hairs about the definition of what is television and what isn't and blah blah blah, and that's sort of beside the point. Well, it is beside the point. The growth of sports to the way that we know it today is reliant on television being a screen that's pushing content at you. And this is what makes it possible to put more money in the development of the teams, and it also grows the sport, right? Because not everybody can afford $100, $200, $300 a ticket or more, depending on how close you're sitting to the action, right? The closer you're sitting to the ice or to the court or to the dugout or whatever, it's going to cost a lot more. But you can only put so many people in a stadium. You can put 50,000 people in a stadium. You can put 100,000 people in a stadium. You can put a lot of people in a stadium. But the thing is you can't put hundreds of thousands of people in a stadium, and you can't put millions of people in a stadium. And word of mouth only gets you so far if you've only got 50,000 people in one room. Now, you could say, oh, well, 50,000 is a lot of people, but it's not, from an economical point of view, going to create the kind of buzz and the kind of mass media and mass appeal and mass exposure that you need to be able to justify the kinds of cost overhead to grow the sport to where they are now. So in order to grow audiences, you need to actually make your sport available to more people so that they can get excited about it. And in order for somebody to get into something and get excited about it, they first need to be aware of it. And if they're not aware of it and they don't know somebody that's aware of it, then there's no way for them to get excited, and you can't really get them hooked, and they're certainly not going to buy a ticket to a game for a sport that they've never heard of. And so there's a symbiotic relationship, which sometimes is tenuous, and that's just life. You don't always get along with your brothers and your sisters, and you patch it up and go on, and you go along to get along. And so too is that the same deal with television and sports. I mean, sometimes we've got reporters on the sidelines asking stupid questions, and the players get pissed off, and you're playing your game, and some reporter shoves a microphone in your face and goes, "Hey, you know what? Tonight you guys lost 38-0. I was just wondering how you feel." Well, how the fuck do you think I felt, you fucking moron? I lost. Do you think I enjoy losing? Do you think I wanted to lose? Do you think that, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, you need to have the eyeballs to grow the sport. And in addition to needing the eyeballs to grow the sport, you also need to be able to have the you also need to be able to have that reach. You need to be able to get the eyeballs. You need to be able to get people knowing. You have to spread awareness about your product. And at the end of the day, kids, I mean, sports at a major league level is a product, right? It has to be monetized and it has to have something assigned to it. It has to have a value assigned to it. And the value is often determined, if not exclusively determined, by the amount of interest and the amount of eyeballs and the amount of attention that it has. The more people that are engaged with your product or with your organization or with your whatever it is, the more value intrinsically that it's going to have. And the more value that something has, the more money you're going to make, the more money you make, the more investment you can make in the team, the more investment you can make in programs to develop athletes, the more grassroots efforts you can take at high schools and grade schools and having meet the players and those sorts of things. So those kids in turn develop an interest in a sport and then start at a young age and become proficient and then become the next generation of superstars, furthering the interest in the sport. And when that happens, you have more money, and then the more money. It's a cycle, right? And what ends up happening is every generation, you'll notice that the bar gets higher and talent gets better, and in a lot of ways, you get better basketball. Just in the last 30 years, if you were to compare, for example, the quality of basketball, or not you know what, I'm not going to say quality, the pace of basketball, say from maybe 1984, 1985 onwards to now, you'll notice that the game is, in a lot of ways, it's a lot faster. It's a lot Things tend to be snappy in a lot of ways. There's a lot more things that are going on, and the general sense of athleticism, which was always good from day one, has really gotten higher. And so, in a lot of ways, the game has improved. Now, there's a lot of things you might say, oh, well, it was better in the good old days. But for the most part, I would say that the quality of basketball and a lot of major league sports are arguably higher in many respects than before. Now, maybe some other aspects not strictly related to the athleticism and the overall quality of the on court, on ice, on field product, you might argue that. But on field, on court, I would say I don't think there are too many people that would disagree, including players from back in the day, right? Because at the end of the day, anybody that's really into their respective sport, be it as a player, a coach, or fan that has any kind of background in it, you want to see people do it. You want to see people be the best they can be. And so as time goes on, the level of quality goes up. And I think that's really important. And I think that we've seen it. But that gets back to my original point, which is it's extremely important to make sure that that awareness is there. And you have to give support. You have to give support to something new. You have to give support to anything new or anything that you are trying to, oh, got the hiccups again, trying to attract a background to. And the NBA started out before television, in the early days of radio, and it had the benefit of being a relatively new sport at that time, and developed over the last 100 and some odd years into what it is today. But we've also had other sports and other things come into the limelight and start out with radio and then move on to television and hockey, what have you. And we also have a number of interesting leagues that are starting to kind of come into the limelight, which I think is really exciting. But one of the things that I think has been much maligned and is not given the credit that is due and has not been given the valuation that is due is women's basketball. I would say women's sports in general, but in particular, I find that basketball gets a particularly short end of the stick. I think that the quality of women's basketball is phenomenal. In many ways, it's a more exciting and interesting game strategically and in terms of play and more cerebral, as well as more physical on the court. And I feel that the WNBA has been around a while now, well over 20 years, well over. And for the longest time, you couldn't even watch any of it on ESPN. You could not watch, or ESPN or any network really. You couldn't watch any women's basketball. You couldn't watch any WNBA games, much less D1 collegiate women's basketball on TV on your favorite sports network. And it was only relatively recently that they started putting them on. And in Canada, it's even worse. They only put on highlights of some of these games, which in my opinion is complete and total bullshit. But be that as it may, that's just sort of the way it's been. And when I go to a Syracuse Orange game, home or away, it doesn't really matter whether they're playing, if I'm watching them at Michigan or whatever. You know, look at the audience. Look at how many people are in the bleachers and are in the seats at a women's D1 basketball game in the United States versus a women's game. Let's say we'll take a really good rivalry, and I mean obviously I'm going to be biased with this, but this is a good long-standing rivalry. Whoever you root for in, if you're a basketball fan, an NCAA D1 basketball fan, you're going to get this rivalry. So Syracuse and Duke, right? The Syracuse Orange, or the former Syracuse Orangemen, if you will. Now it's the Syracuse Orange, so that it's more inclusive. And say the Duke Blue Devils, for example. That is a long-standing rivalry. That rivalry has gone on for a good, got to be close to 100 years, probably over, I would say. So let's say you have, so if you take, say, a quarterfinal, Sweet 16, 8, Final 4, whatever, even leading up, to those finals, if you go to a men's game, if you go to a men's basketball D1 Syracuse game, or or you know, or the Blue Devils or whoever, the men's stadium, it's packed. So the dome is completely and totally packed. It's standing room only. You've got scalpers, buzzing around, and then the cops leading them away, and people trying to pull all kinds of bullshit, and people will get in fistfights on the street, and people will be lined up down the street trying to get tickets. People are fighting. Literally, they are fighting to get into these games. You know what I mean? It's, if you go to Syracuse on a big game night that's leading up to the finals, and God help you if you wind up wanting to get a ticket to the finals. I mean, it's like trying to get a blowjob from God. Not that he would do such a thing, and I suppose it's blasphemous, but I'm going to presume that God has a sense of humor. There was a great quote from, I can't remember who the comedian was, so I apologize, but he said, "You want to know how I know that God has a sense of humor? Because he gave me a beard, mustache, and body hair, and I'm bald." So I thought that was pretty funny. But anyway, going back to my main point, is that the concept of, if you go to a men's basketball game, a men's D1 basketball game, it's standing room only, man. Like, you can't get a ticket for love nor money. So you better fucking hope that you have a season ticket. Because if you don't have a season ticket, or you don't happen to know somebody, there isn't a snowball's chance in hell that you're getting in. It's just, it's not going to happen. Conversely, you could have the same stakes for a women's basketball game, same team, same venue, same everything, and you'll notice that the amount of people that are in the arena, in the stadium, are far less, and one could perhaps charitably put it, a fifth. You will still see people in there, right? It won't be empty, but they won't be opening up separate sections in order to do this. And this completely, to me, I don't get it. I don't get it.
Are you getting a worse quality of basketball? Absolutely not. As I say, you're getting in a number of different ways. You're getting a better form of basketball. You are getting a more strategic game. You are getting a more physical game. You are getting you're getting a you're getting a higher, not higher stakes, but you are getting in many ways a more intelligently played game of basketball with the physicality, right, the athleticism to match. The right, there's no it's the nets aren't shorter. There's no handicap, and there's certainly no handicap in terms of quality on court, none whatsoever. And I think that the idea that there's hardly anybody watching is complete and total horseshit. It's complete horseshit. But there's a couple of different reasons for this. I mean, not that there's any one finger that can be pointed, and a lot of this stuff is systemic. I mean, to be fair, I will give it this much. It's a lot better now than it used to be. You can now watch WNBA games on TV. You can watch them on ESPN. You can watch D1 NCAA women's basketball matches on ESPN. And they're not generally dumped onto ESPN2 or ESPN3 online anymore. So I will give credit for that. And, you know, I'm happy about that. And I think a lot of people are happy about that. And that's fantastic. And although I do need to give credit where credit's due, and you can't change the past, I will say it took entirely too long in order to get there. The WNBA and the NCAA collegiate D1 women's basketball programs have been fantastic for a good long time. And I think as a result of that lack of desire on the part of the individuals that could be bringing this to our television, I think we've lost out on a good 15, 20 years of market development time because nobody wanted to put female basketball players on TV, which is complete bullshit. You would hear comments and you would hear comments from executives, and it's on record. I won't say which networks and I won't say which individuals, but very prominent networks and very prominent individuals saying, oh, well, nobody wants to see the WNBA. It's a non starter. Well, how do you know that nobody wants to see it if you haven't even bothered to try to put it on? What information are you using to quantify what individuals want to see? I work in television too, and I'm also working in American national television in a syndication capacity. And you live and die by the numbers. You live and die by the ratings. You live and die by the numbers that you get from Nielsen. What happens is your show will run in so and so many time slots, as it were, and then there's an aggregate of the average viewership of a particular station in so many markets at that time, and then that's basically divided in the amount of viewers for that particular time block, and that effectively makes up your rating. And it doesn't really matter if it's live. It doesn't matter if it's pre-taped. It doesn't matter. That is your broadcast block, and that is your numbers. Or those are your numbers, I should say. But what the thing is in order for you to be able to get an aggregate of something that you can see, that you can actually get numbers on it and say, okay, well, we have so and so many people watching this at this time, what you need to understand is that you still have to be able to put the thing on at some point in order to figure out if people want to watch it. You don't know if people are going to watch until you actually give them the option to actually see it, right? I mean, one, everybody had a first time for something. You had a first time where you played a video game. You had a first time when you walked, when you took your first steps as a baby. The first time you had pizza. The first time you had chocolate. The first time you had sex. Regardless of whether you're Fabio banging 30 million women and having them all, basically give you 28,000 numbers that aren't fake, or vice versa, if you're the kind of woman that can have 28,000 guys with their tongue hanging out, you weren't amazing the first time you did it. There was a time where you didn't even know what sex was, and the first time you fucked, you were probably terrible. You get better over time. But how did you know that you were going to like sex until you actually had it? Well, you probably didn't. I mean, enough people are saying, "Oh yeah, you're going to love this," depending on who it is and how good they are. But anyway, be that as they may, be that be that as it may, generally speaking, people suck. I was going to say people fucking suck, but anyway, maybe that's a little too close unintentionally to the secondary point at hand. But anyway, the bottom line is in order for somebody to formulate an opinion as to whether they like something, you have to be able to present them with the option with that in the first place. And it's very difficult to get an original concept on television because generally these shows cost a lot of money to produce, and there's a lot of decisions by committee because airtime is worth a lot of money. So when you're making a decision as to what you're going to put on the air, you have to have some kind of baseline to figure out what exactly it is that you're going to put on television and hopefully, maybe, possibly not lose your advertisers, alienate your advertisers so that you can live to broadcast another day. That having been said, you could say, oh, well, not nobody likes women's basketball. We're not going to chance it and put it on the air. Taking away the whole concept of you have to start it at you have to start at some point in order for you to be able to make a decision. Well, and you have to have some kind of a baseline. Well, you can look at there are other ancillary baselines that you can use to determine whether there is a market for a particular product. One of those things are, well, do people like basketball? Well, fuck, man. Look at how many people go to the NBA games. What do you think the numbers were for the finals for the NBA finals on, say, TNT? You know what I mean? Like there has to be a market and supply and demand. People like basketball. People like basketball. People like hockey. People like baseball. People have loved baseball from, forever. It is the great American game, one of many great American games, but one of the games that is known and is intrinsically linked with the history and the cultural fabric of America. Baseball is the quintessential American game, as is uh, as is basketball. Okay, so it was invented by a Canadian, but he wasn't in Canada when he invented it. And besides, I can tell you as a Canadian, the only way to get anywhere is to go to the United States. Fuck, that's what I did. You try to do something in this goddamn country and you get shit on all over by fellow Canadians that don't want to rock the boat. It's a number two country in every sense of the word, right? And they treat you like shit. And then you go, oh, whatever, I'll see. And then an American network sees it and they go, hey, you know what? What you did is really, really cool. Could you make more of that? We'll pay for it. And that's basically what happened to me. And this is basically why so many Canadians go to the United States that are talented because they get sick of being shit on and treated like garbage in Canada, which is what happens. And then they go, and then when they get famous or whatever else, or they're successful, they go, oh, well, I'm a proud Canadian. Fuck off. They blew you off, and now they want to ride your coattails in this little red hen bullshit. So I'm perfectly happy to call this crap out. My show's on the air. I'm generally a lot happier with my American audience than my Canadian audience, and I really enjoy being in the United States, and I really couldn't give a rat's ass, so I'm just gonna. That's my position, and I'm sticking to it because it's correct, whether you like it or fucking not. Anyway, again, going back to my original point, people do like basketball, and people like basketball. They like collegiate basketball. So at this point, even 20, 25, 30 years ago, it had already well been established that people were more than willing to tune in and pay good money to watch collegiate D1 basketball as well as the NBA. So in the American market, it is quite clear that two leagues could be economically viable, sustainable, and people will watch it. And God knows all the other weird shit that you see these days. Oh, well, let's see. Well, what have we got? Poker. Poker's not a fucking sport. It is not a sport. It's a game. You want to watch a bunch of fucking fat people sit around and play cards? I don't. Is it on the sports networks? Absolutely. Is it a sport? Fuck no. No, it's nowhere near a goddamn sport. Is it a sport that requires skill and intelligence? Yes. Am I going to sit here and say a bunch of poker players are a bunch of morons and they're stupid and they have 2 IQ points? Absolutely not. It is a difficult, skill-driven game, and it requires. But are you going to see any of those guys squatting and doing push-ups at the gym? I don't fucking think so. They're sitting there more likely eating a case of Mallow bars and having a case of stogies than they are, spending any time at the gym, with some notable exceptions. But for the most part, if you're able to pump iron, the ability to pump iron does not preclude your ability to play cards. Ergo, it is not a sport. Ergo, probably should not be on a sports station. But people watch it, and that's fine. Same deal with darts. I would say that darts is more of a game. God knows it's sure as fuck a lot more interesting, and I wouldn't say athletic. It's certainly more active than sitting down on your fat ass and playing cards. But again, I would argue that this is a case where it is more of a game than a sport. You get up, you throw the dart. It is a game of accuracy. It is a game of coordination, right? I'm not going to sit here and act like it isn't. It's very, very difficult, and there's a lot of skill. And we've actually done episodes on it. Same deal with pool. That's also really hard. Billiards, also very hard. Also very hard to find a fucking billiard table if you want to actually try the game. But be that as it may, it is still, for the most part, what I would consider to be a game rather than a sport. It's more strategic and cerebral rather than physical. But going back to basketball, and all this is just a long-winded way of saying that
the following, which is, if a country with 400 million people in it have established over a 30 to 50-year period that economically can sustain two leagues, two leagues for a sport, there's no reason that you can't have a third one. You know what I mean? There's no reason why you couldn't have WNBA or even a collegiate D1 women's basketball. There's no reason for it. Yet the level of vehement denial, and it's always old white guys with dicks, isn't it? And granted, I'm a white guy, and as a guy, I hopefully have a dick. That being said, I'm not going to sit at a table and turn around and act like there's no room for it. I don't give a flying fuck if you're white, black, orange, green, purple, or have polka dots. And I don't care if you have, one head, two head, I don't care. If you are able to do something really well, then you should be given a seat at the table in order to show what you can do. I believe this very strongly. I don't think my country does. I don't think Canada does. This is a country that's more interested in lip service than actually doing anything, and then sitting there and doing the cancel culture thing when they don't get a nice little participation hat and a fucking star. But that notwithstanding, and I joke about a lot of this stuff, I really do think that people should, with no bullshit, be able to get to do what they're good at. And there is no reason that women's basketball should not have been on the air in a good time slot 20, 30 years ago. Now, what I will say is, you're probably not going to put women's basketball or any sport that's new in a primetime time slot competing with other more profitable programming. Not because there's female players or because there's male or whatever, but just because it's new. But what you can do is you can do a leader approach, and you can have it bookended with programming that is already established and already has the numbers. So for example, you could take a women's basketball game, if it was the first time it were being broadcast on a major network, and you can either put it just before or just after a NBA game, for example. So what happens is then you get people that are already into basketball, and they might not be inclined to change the channel. This is interesting. What's this? So they get a little bit more basketball than they thought they were going to get because they tuned in for, say the Clippers game or the Lakers game or what have you. And then they go, hey, wait a minute. I earmarked 2 hours of my day, and I was going to watch this NBA game, or I was going to watch the Villanova, D1 men's game or what have you.
and and it and now you've got a new option. And guess what? Those numbers are actually going to flow, and they are going to follow. So what's going to happen is you're going to wind up having viewers that follow to the new sport, and then over time, then you start getting numbers that it has its own audience, and so on and so on. And that's how you introduce new sports. That's how you introduce new sports. And I want to show a little clip, and I don't think that it needs to be. I don't think it needs to be belabored. I think it does athletes of any background a great disservice to try to basically basically sell the point of skill. But I want to show you a clip that was just we shot just for fun when we were in the middle of shooting Go Nitro, and we were very fortunate to get Brittany Sykes and Alexis Peterson to show our host and myself really how to just the basics of basketball. Now, I knew them, but there's a lot of people that don't, right? Particularly in countries and areas where the show runs, where maybe they don't play basketball, or maybe they don't. And I'm after this clip, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we came up with Go Nitro before I start playing, because it kind of plays into this idea of how to introduce something. But for those of you that have never watched women's basketball and have a stupid, fucked up idea about it, I'm just going to cue up a clip here, and I want you to see just how wrong you are. And you should be happy how wrong you are. I know people don't like to know they're wrong. I want you to understand that this is just Brittany fucking around. This is just Brittany fucking around. Now, to be fair, Brittany is very proud of her arms, and she would always refer to them, these are my guns, these are my guns. And she'd take her arms and say, these are my guns. So this is a clip that I was actually behind the camera. I was on the balcony. We shot this at the Mallow Center, which is the practice facility where the Syracuse Orange works stuff out with both the men's and the women's teams, where they practice and they work on their drills and then the big games. So take a look.
Can you do it again? Why not?
Wow. Why not? Let's try.
Good for you.
Let's see.
That is not.
All right, let's see.
There it is. Yo, I'm calling it. There it is, yo.
2 in a row.
Wow.
I'm good to go.
Yeah, I'm calling it. There it is.
I'm gonna say, wait.
I think
Yes.
that is. Can you do it again? Why not? Wow.
Why not? Let's try.
Get that?
Good for you.
Let's see.
That is not.
All right, let's see.
There it is.
She actually
Yo, I'm calling it. There it is, yo.
2 in a row.
Wow.
I'm good to go.
Yeah, I'm calling it. There it is.
I'm gonna say, wait.
I think that
Yes.
is.
But this
Can you do it again?
again,
Why not? Wow.
Why not? Let's try.
Good for you.
Let's see.
That is not.
All right, let's see.
There it is. Yo, I'm calling it. There it is, yo.
2 in a row.
Wow.
I'm good to go.
Yeah, I'm calling it. There it is.
I'm gonna say, wait.
I think
Yes.
that is. Can you do it again? Why not? Wow.
Why not? Let's try.
Good for you.
Let's see.
That is not.
All right, let's see.
There it is. Yo, I'm calling it. There it is, yo.
2 in a row.
Wow.
I'm good to go.
Yeah, I'm calling it. There it is.
So that's something that they're going to need to work on in a firmware update of this software. But anyway, yeah. So this is just something that's really, really important, I think, to show. You know what I mean? And again, this is just a bunch of fucking around. I'm actually going to turn this off. So, these are things that are worth pointing out. And again, so Go Nitro, I get this a lot with people that watch the show, and they ask, well, where did you come up with the idea? Now, the premise of Go Nitro is every athlete has a first day, and basically what we do is we make arrangements with major sporting and athletically strenuous professions, both sports teams, and then we'll work with various well-known police forces and law enforcement agencies and the military and the Air Force and so on, just to kind of show what it takes to get a realistic idea to do that. That it's attainable, but it requires a lot of work. And a good example of Go Nitro is, as a concept, it's pretty new, and I didn't really think about that when we had initially come up with it. I just was trying to come up with something interesting that I wanted to see and kind of straddle the fence of the sort of thing that we hadn't really seen on television, particularly as it related to sports programming. Now, when we came up with the concept of Go Nitro, it was designed to do two things, both from the cynical business end and from the getting people interested in sports end. And we so as with pretty much, but particularly in sports, advertising is the name of the game, right? The cost of rights for major sports is extremely high because, like everything else, it gets more and more and more expensive. And the more expensive something gets, the more money you have to have in order to pay for it, right? So that money's got to come from somewhere. So when you have ESPN or FS1 or TNT or whatever, you need to have those ad and sponsorship revenues that you can use to cover the cost of your programming, particularly things with live rights. And the most important thing that you can do with your viewers is you don't want them to get up. You don't want them to finish the commercial break and watch something else, right? They'll watch their NBA game or they'll watch their baseball game or whatever, and then they'll just kind of get up, and once their game is finished, then they will just turn the channel, watch something else, go up and eat or fart or whatever. But from an advertising point of view, it's not really what you want. It's in your best interests to have people watching as long as possible, right? Because the more people that are watching your content, the more your advertising is worth. So you have to kind of find a way to keep asses in the seats. And there were some interesting things that I identified coming from my background in network television programming. And that was one of the things that I noticed, and I drew on my experience with that, but I also drew on my experience being an athlete myself, albeit not at that level, but fairly high up there, provincial and national, and things that I noticed weren't being covered. And I'll start with the cynical aspect first. One is a lot of people statistically, and this is backed up by research, generally speaking, in a household with a couple, you will have typically, for the most part, I mean, there are exceptions to this, there's exceptions to every rule, but by and large, statistically, what we found, and you could say, well, I didn't need a flow chart to figure that out, and that's a bit of a joke, but it is true, is that typically couples, one one person, one half of the couple that is interested in the sport or sports in question. So you either have the stereotypical beer swilling guy that is the one that's watching football and his wife is bored to tears, or you will have the gal that is interested in the sport, and the guy is bored to tears because he's not really a sports guy. And we did a little bit of digging, and we found, okay, well, why is it that only one person is interested? Why is it either the traditional guy, the stereotypical guy, or the girl? Well, by and large, there is a certain macho culture in a lot of sports programming and the attitude of sports programming. There's some efforts to change this, and we're getting there, but we're not entirely there yet. And what I mean by the macho idea is there is this assumption that whoever is watching already knows the sport in question. So if you're in a basketball but you're not in a football, probably don't give a shit about football because you don't know anything about football. You know about basketball. So when your game ends and then a football game comes on, you're not really going to watch it because it's not your thing. Well, why is it that people are interested in one thing and not the other? What grabs somebody so that they gravitate to one sport and not the other? Well, it's usually familiarity, and there's usually something that grabs somebody, or a kernel of something that happened when they were a kid, or somebody threw them a ball or something, so that they had enough context with a particular sport to develop an interest in it. Maybe their dad was into it. Maybe their dad took them to the ball game when they were a kid. Maybe they caught a baseball from one of the players and got it signed. There's always an emotional center, a kernel that kind of is what sets somebody on that path to have an allegiance and a romance for that particular sport, male or female. Stereotypically and traditionally, it's always been thought of as male, and certainly there's a lot of that. There's a lot of truth to that, but the same thing goes on both points. So the what ends up happening is we needed to figure out a way, and we needed to figure out why people were interested in one and not the other. Well, it turns out the answer is pretty simple. The reason that people just kind of tune in and a one and don't want to watch the other is because of this kind of macho mentality, where there is the assumption that you already know about the sport that it is that you're watching. And you can't have this kind of Peter Puck children's programming thing to explain what the show is, because you've got all these macho beer drinking dudes or tomboy, or expert women sport type people, and they don't really want to be thought of as having to be educated. So what happens? And I can say this as a guy. Um, I'm secure enough in my manhood, so to speak. So let's say you get 5 or 6 guys, okay, and you go to the game, like you go to a football game, or you're watching a football game on TV, and you're watching the Super Bowl, and you bring over your nachos and your cheese and your chips and your Pepsi and what have you. Let's say you've got one guy that's invited and he doesn't know anything about football. Well, if you've got like 5 or 6 guys that every year their tradition is to watch, the football game, the one thing that guys don't like to do, the one thing that men do not like to do, is they don't like to admit that they're the one person that doesn't know something, right? Because then they don't want to be seen as not macho or not whatever. So you'll have to get somebody that sort of suffers in silence. And they don't, what's a fucking down? I don't know what that is. And that, there's more people than you would think. And the same goes with the partner. The same goes with the partner. A lot of the disinterest in it is that you just you just see a bunch of guys going and like knocking into each other, and it just seems like a bunch of brutish shit, and you don't really know what you're looking at because nobody's explaining it to you, and there's not enough context for you to have enough interest to have it explained to you, and you certainly don't want to look like an idiot to ask. Then chances are, if it's not your sport, then you're sure as hell not going to want to look stupid by asking. And the other guys are going to want to watch the game anyway. It's the same. It's the same with women. It's the same. It's the same on both sides. It's the same shit. You have the guy's married and his wife isn't interested. But if she had context, she might well be. Oh, so that's interesting. Here's the strategy of it. So this is why I have to do this type of procedure, and this is why, if there's some context or something you can relate to, then it becomes a little less boring. And it doesn't have to be something really, really complicated or right away. It just has to be enough. You just have to have enough context that you can, that it provides a kernel of it. Just enough to keep watching. Just enough so that they're watching another 30 seconds or 40 seconds or whatever. That they have just enough information that they have the context to follow along. And then it's in 2 minutes, and then 5 minutes, and whatever. And then before long, you're watching. So the idea of Go Nitro was, the cynical idea was to keep people watching the same channel. So that instead of, when they were waiting for their sport to come on, or their sport had just finished, then Go Nitro would come on, and it would be kind of an interesting, did you know, kind of what different types of sports are, and it's presented in that way. So it's actually pretty interesting. It's a half-hour show, and it was sandwiched in between major sports programming. But what it does is people would watch the show and it would catch their eye because it was a lot different than anything else that they'd seen on TV. And I found that families were watching it, and guys were watching it, and gals were watching it, single, family, married, whatever. And then what ended up happening is that if you had one person that was interested in a sport, but the other person wasn't, then suddenly they both started watching it. So they didn't actually have to ask to be so called educated. The show was interesting, and it was presented in this kind of Discovery Channel esque way. And then suddenly, by the time the episode of Go Nitro finished, the next sporting event that would be a live event would be related to whatever episode of Go Nitro was running. So, for example, you might have a basketball game on ESPN or one of the Fox stations, say, and then Go Nitro would come on with an episode about, say, NASCAR racing, right? And then the episode with Alex Tagliani would come on, and you'd get to learn about the basics of NASCAR racing and sort of see how a regular person would fare against Alex Tagliani after they raced against Alex Tagliani or after they learned from him and got a lesson from him. And it's fun. It's fun. But then they would actually put a live NASCAR race after it. So if you consider that you have somebody that was watching, say, a basketball game before it or a football game before it, and then they see an episode of Go Nitro on NASCAR, and then a NASCAR race comes on, now suddenly they have context. Oh, so that's what that flag means. Oh, so that's how they deal with the cars. Oh, so that's what's going on. So you've basically just given somebody a lot of interesting information, and the human mind, being curious, now wants to take, oh, there's a live program that is reinforcing that's about the same thing that I just saw. Let's see if I can follow a little bit more of this NASCAR thing now after watching the episode. And invariably they can. So now what we've successfully been able to do is we've been able to actually take somebody that was into basketball or football that didn't give two shits about NASCAR, and after watching an episode of Go Nitro, they're staying, and next thing you know, instead of watching an hour or 2 hour game, now they're sitting down and watching another game, so they're now watching for 5 hours. So now we've been able to bridge and transition somebody and introduce them to another sport. Now, what we hope is that they or their kids might want to try it for real. But you know what? Again, and I just come right and say it. The cynical part of it, as long as you're sitting and watching the programming, that's 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 the programming goal, and that's all well and good. But at least it now, even if you're sitting and watching a sport that you weren't going to watch before, at least now you can understand it. And not only can you understand it, you don't feel like an idiot, and you don't feel like you're being patronized and talked down to. And everybody's so fucking patronizing these days. You talk to somebody on the phone, and you have some call center, and it's somebody that you have to ask them 5 times, and they can't even get a sentence straight, and then they're the ones patronizing you. Like, what the fuck is that? You know what I mean? Like, it's just I speak 2 languages, and I can make myself clear in either of them. And it's not easy to learn another language, and I you know what I mean. So, and it's tough, and there's a lot of people that emigrate all over the world and go to great lengths to learn the language, and hell, a lot of my classmates are from everywhere, but I can understand everybody. And but I'm not, you know what I mean. And when I was overseas, I wasn't giving people attitude when I was learning the language, because I was working on my proficiency. But I don't like being patronized. Nobody likes being patronized. It doesn't matter whether it's in your language or somebody else's language. Nobody likes to feel stupid. So suddenly you have a show like this that is, you weren't expecting it. It came on right after you were about to change the channel, but now it keeps you watching a little longer. And now you're watching the other one, and you feel good because you can actually understand a little bit of what's going on, or you can understand enough that you can follow. And the other thing is, if you are the partner of somebody that's in a sport that you don't follow and you just feel completely left out, even if your better half doesn't or can't or doesn't have the ability to explain the game in a way that you are A, understand, B, are interested in, or C, sorry, dinner, have any context with, if it's presented in an interesting way, now you can at least watch and follow along. You know what I mean? And then if it's something that you want to try or do, you can. And I think that's great. Now, the other thing about the show that I like is that it, the byproduct is I want people to have a realistic idea of what it is to go out and become proficient at it. And I want people to start doing something and go out and try it if they can. For example, I mean, to be fair, I'd wanted to do Krav Maga for a very long time, and I couldn't find a reputable training center that had instructors that actually had some proficiency in it. And then I found one, and then we did an episode on it, and I signed up. I actually ended up getting into sports after doing an episode or doing something media related, and then it ended up becoming a really major part of my life. And I think that's the power of a lot of this kind of programming. Doesn't need to be pedantic, doesn't need to hit you on top of the head. But again, it is a new concept, and all I did is I took a very old concept, which is I took a Discovery Channel type pacing for a show, and then I just took an existing concept presentation style and then adapted it to sports. So what I did is I took aspects that I knew already worked and people wanted to see and had ratings, and then I just added something to it. And this is why I say it's a bunch of horse shit that people would say, oh, well, nobody wants to watch women's sports. That'll never fly. Well, we already know that basketball is popular and can sustain two leagues, two male leagues. It can sustain the professional level, the NBA, and it can sustain the collegiate level. And then when there's FIBA and Olympic style basketball, that's able to be sustained as well. So there's no fucking reason that you shouldn't have women's basketball. Because as I say, the quality of play is just as good, if not better. In a lot of ways, it is a more surgical and cerebral and physical form of play. But again, you're not going to have a full stadium if people don't know about it. And in order to know about it, you have to promote it. In order to promote it, you got to put it on TV. You have to make it available so that people can actually watch it and formulate their own opinion. You don't have to put something new in a prime time slot, but make it available, and make it available, say, on the weekend or whatever, in a time slot that's not necessarily going to be scary for advertisers, but at least so people can be awake and fucking see it. And so I think that we should have a lot more women's basketball, and I think we should have a lot more women's sports. We are getting a lot more of that, which I think is great. As I say, we can now get D1 on TV, and we are now able to get WNBA on TV, and women's hockey is sort of coming into its own. But what about women's collegiate hockey? What about women's collegiate lacrosse? What about women's collegiate rowing? What about women's collegiate softball, baseball, badminton, tennis? I don't ever see any of that stuff on TV, ever. And this is world-class Olympic shit. These athletes are fantastic. And many of them are on Team USA or Team Canada or Team whatever in their respective sports. And you can sit there and you can pay a bunch of fucking lip service all you want. But until you actually get off the shitter and provide an opportunity so that the stuff can be seen and build an audience, as far as I'm concerned, you've got no goddamn right to basically shit on it and decide what the case is going to be before you even start it. Again, like I said before, you don't have to put it at a prime time slot and bunch the finals for NBA for a new sport or a new league or a new whatever, that you're still working on the numbers. But in a multi-channel universe and a universe where we now have streaming, there is absolutely no reason for it, and I think it's a pile of bullshit. And again, don't get me wrong. I'm the first to say we've gotten a lot further than we used to be. And I think that's fantastic. And I think things are getting better. And I think the world of live sports is very exciting. I'm very honored and privileged to have the chance to work within it. And I get to work with some really awesome people. But as far as we've come in the last few years, I think we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go, and I think there's still a good amount of bullshit, horse shit, buffalo shit, insert whatever bovine grade A Alberta beef size horse shit uh, of any type of shit you want to call it. It's still shit, and it still needs to be dealt with, and we have a long way to go. So that's pretty much my rant, I would say, for the time being. And that was just something I wanted to get off my chest before I started playing. And now, so again, I know I keep teasing the idea of, you know, doing synthesizer programming and not doing the presets. I just keep having these crazy days, and I will do it. But I think that for now, it's been so busy because it's just, I mean, the show, season 2 is long since been finished, but we're trying to get it on the server, and then season 3 is up and all that kind of stuff. And so it's just I haven't yet had the chance. But the good news is I'll have a little bit of a reprieve probably around the Christmas break and going into the new year, because it's typically a little slower around that time. So hopefully I'll have the chance to get into some itty bitty nitty gritty synthy winthy original stuff. So this one will probably be a bit of a shorty because I spent a whole lot of time, you know, fucking around and, well, not fucking around, but talking about stuff that's really important. Some people will consider that fucking around. I don't. And before we get started, let's see if we have any comments. Oh, that's interesting. Olivia Carroll, V Arc Tech, Vark Tech. But the V is Arkansas Tech is my guess. I'm not sure what team she's referring to, but you know, it still applies. It still applies. I'll have to do a bit of googling on that one. I have to admit that's a team that I haven't followed, if that's what is being referred to. But this is, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to have more of this. We need to have more women's sports. I'd like to see more basketball as a basketball fan. And again, it's across the board, man. It's not just Syracuse. It's not just Duke. It's not just Villanova. It's not just LSU. It's not, you know what I mean? It's not just Ohio. It's across the board. We need to have more sports. A few more comments. This is actually an interesting one from Mia. Women need to support women's sports by showing up or watching too. When the fan base is mostly men, you find that there's no shortage of fans for women's figure skating because short skirts so. You know what? That is a fair assessment. That's a fair assessment. It's yes, there's a lot of perverts. And we're human. Nobody's perfect. Like I say, I'm a big fan of basketball. There's not a whole lot of, and yeah, I'm a guy. But to be fair, basketball is not a uniform that uh, necessarily shows a whole lot of skin. It's really about the athleticism of it. I'm a guy. I like women. We like. I think we all like seeing um, attractive people of the opposite gender, or if we are, or the same gender, if we are LGBTQ. But I don't think that the place for that is in sports, right? If you must get your jollies off, there's plenty of programming that is not sports related that one can do that. Not saying it's right, not saying it's okay, but at least it's not misappropriating programming and sport that's not designed for that. So I would absolutely agree with that. I find sports, if I, this is again from Mia Perry, I find sports, if I played a lot, it's hard to watch. But if I tried it and played a little, it's more fun to watch, enough to know the rules, not so much that you're like, I'd have got that. Yeah, I would, yeah, I would absolutely agree with that because what happens is a lot of the time you'll get something by watching, but what happens is you get a good amount of context. And context is extremely, extremely important. And it's one thing to watch something, and um, it's one thing to watch something, but once you kind of sit down and do it, and then you're kind of forcing your body to go through the mechanics, then it's if you'll pardon my expression, an unintentional pun, it's a whole different ball game, right? Because it's the idea of being able to intellectualize something, but it's not really gonna kind of hit home for you the skill and what is needed until you actually try it. And this is extremely important, and you get it on a whole different level. And the other flip side of this, which I think is also extremely important and very cool, is that you got to remember that you you're not you might find that you may well find that you have a proclivity for something that you didn't think you did. You might find that you're awesome at hockey or basketball or whatever, and you thought that you were destined to be some couch potato or God knows what else. It's not unheard of to try something thinking, you know what, I'm gonna fucking suck at this and whatever, I'll just get out there. And then you kind of go out there and go, hey, you know what, hey, I might be able to do this. I might be able to do this. And then you go out and you get a little bit more serious about it. And then, you know what I mean? It's not unheard of. However, it is. I mean, it might be a little less common. It's not unheard of to have people become Olympians later on in life in particular sports that they found that there's a proclivity to it. It's maybe more of an exception rather than the rule, but it's not unheard of. So if you go out and you try something, you might find that you're a little bit better at it and you might have more of a natural inclination for it and a background than you thought. And when you do that, you get something else out of it, out of life, and go, holy shit, I didn't know I could do that. So yeah, thanks for that, man. You're absolutely right. You are absolutely, absolutely right. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna try and get this guy over here. Mia Perry gave me a smiley face. Well, thank you so much, Mia. So what I'm gonna try and do, and here's the other sort of ghetto, unprofessional side of the program, where I try to figure out what to do with these fucking cables, because I have all this shit. Like I said, I need to get a stand, but I've only been using this device, to be fair, for a couple of days. So whatever. It is what it is, and so on and so forth. So I'm just gonna try and get this guy in here, such as it is, so that I can see the comments. And again, if any of you are out there and you want to comment, I do want to hear from you, and I will feature the comment and address it if I see it. Now I have the comment pane open all the time. So the cool thing about that is I can actually see, and while I'm playing, I can see because I just kind of put it under here. So that's very cool. So I'm just gonna play something. I don't really know what to play us out. We'll do it live. Anyway, I don't know if you've seen that clip, but yeah, I'm just gonna do a few minutes of this thing that I really like this patch. I might twiddle around with it a bit. This is my favorite patch with this thing.
reason, it's not actually letting me select this comment for some reason. But Mia Perry says, "Dunno why, but that one makes me think of two people sitting on a bridge and feeding koi below on a river." It's kind of weird. It's odd that it's not letting me select the comments for some reason now. I'm not sure why that is, but that's okay. I just had this device updated, and there's a few things that are a little odd about it. I'm not sure why it's new comments. Warm summer breadcrumbs. Cool. Yeah, I don't know why it's doing that, but come on. Maybe rebooting the device will work. Anyway, like I said, some new stuff was done to this thing, and I'm not sure why. Oh, now it is. Yeah, here we go. I guess I just had to hit it a little harder. Don't know why, but that one makes me think of two people sitting on a bridge and feeding koi fish below in a river. And then after that, she said, "Warm summer breadcrumbs." Yeah, you know what? I got some breadcrumbs in my kitchen. I need to get some more bread. I haven't actually gotten any bread in a while. I need to get some more bread. What other sounds do we have here? I feel a little bit bad because now I'm spending like an hour going on about shit, and then I'm only playing for 20 minutes. So I will get back to a short introduction and then playing for a lot longer because I know it's supposed to be a concert. And again, I have a movie I need to finish. So, but I felt very I felt that it was important to bring up. It's kind of a cool, like the whole sport thing in women's sports, particularly basketball. It's been something that's really been bothering me for a while. But what else have we got here? Let's see if we can improve this a little bit. What happens if I change the... It's kind of funny sounding. Kind of has this whatever turns you on, you can't do that on television kind of 80s. Kind of like early 80s Nickelodeon. Adjust the oscillator. Oh, that sounds nice. It's actually a little bit more full sounding.
just goes to show you change a few parameters, the whole it completely changes the character of the sound. Mia Perry says, "Oh, I hit the wrong comment. That's a little Chariots of Fire. Earlier sound you played there. Yeah, it was. I'll go back and what I did. So what I did is I changed the. I actually goofed around with the attack a bit. So this, I talked about attack a little bit the other day. So this is no attack. So now I'm going to change the, again, and I said this the other night, I'm actually going to wind up getting an overhead camera at some point so that you can actually see what I'm doing on the panel here, and I'm sort of controlling the shape of the sound. But right now I only have two cameras. I don't have a dedicated overhead camera where you can see just what's on the keyboard and the controls that I have on the synthesizer. But you can hear it.
So what I'm gonna, yeah. So basically, I took the oscillators and I. Yeah, it does sound. Mia says. Now it sounds sort of like an organ. Yeah, it does. Cause it's I'm changing the shape. And it's funny. Right now it sounds like an organ. But if I take the cutoff and I turn the cutoff down in the filter envelope, now it sounds a little bit like a flugelhorn. Now it sounds a little bit like a soft brass section, like a flugelhorn. And I can do. I'm going to see if I can actually. So with this, the LFO, I can actually take the vibrato and determine how fast I want it to go. So right now it's at a certain, almost a more operatic, and then I can make it go faster by turning it up, the knob. Yeah. Yeah, you know what? Flugelhorn is very Jerry Goldsmith. Yeah, it is. It really is. And I don't. And Jerry Goldsmith, he didn't write the theme, I don't think, for Voyager, but he wrote a lot of the Star Trek music for a lot of the movies, and he did write, I believe, the score for First Contact. But the theme for Voyager, it makes me think of the theme from Star Trek Voyager, which is very Goldsmith-esque, even though he didn't write it. You can really kind of hear it, like it's. I need a bit more, less of an attack. Yeah. So you almost have a. Yeah, now it's very sort of Voyager. Nice bass. It's kind of nice. Unless I fumble fingers tonight. This might be nice if I modified it. It's almost Old West. Oh, that's sweet. I love that sound, like the sound of stars shining. I think that was the previous one. But yeah, it's, I think that was this one. No. This one. I think this is the one you're referring to. Actually, we could probably modify that a little bit. So I'm going to change. Sounds kind of like a drunken music box. It's a little bit more pure. I like that better. It almost sounds kind of Home Alone-ish. Sort of John Williams. Yeah, it's kind of. God, I'm making lots of mistakes tonight. The Imperial. That's a classic. It will never get old. Well, it will if I keep screwing up the notes. Maybe I'll play it when I'm a little less tired. But yeah, that's a classic. It will never get old. Oh, I heard they rented out the house for one day for a donation to charity. That's awesome. I think that's a great idea. A lot of us grew up with that. So, and I like my good old-fashioned reverb. I have this cable in the way, so I can't play it. I have some strings in here. They're kind of shitty strings because they're just the ones that came with it. It's a nice pipe organ. in here too. Take me out to the ball game, I guess. This isn't really a string. Almost has this kind of Breakfast Club. Yeah. That's nice. Oh, this is nice. This is really... Yeah, you want Chariots of Fire, Mia? This is Chariots of Fire. These are a little out of tune, though. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Actually, I need a pedal. need to kind of have that thing in the background, but I don't have that synthesizer hooked up. But I can. But yeah, this is definitely. I think that pretty much does it for one night. I'm done at 33% on this. Holy shit, I've been going for like an hour and 50 minutes. Well, I think I'm pushing my luck a little bit here, but you know what? That's cool. It's all good. And because I love this graphic so much, if you still happen to be here, I will keep doing these. And once again, if you happen to be enjoying yourself at this ungodly hour of the morning, please do subscribe as per my fancy handy dandy graphic in the lower left hand side. That would be fantastic. And thank you for all of you who are watching. And as always, please do comment when I am live streaming. I don't really have a fixed date yet or time that I'm going to, but I'm going to try to do these pretty much every day, and I'm going to do them at, I'd say, right now I'm doing them at about midnight Regina time, which is right about now. It's about 1 o'clock in the morning, Eastern Standard Time. I'll try to start doing them earlier. It's just with the crazy schedule that I have running the company. Unfortunately, this is oftentimes the only time I have to do it. But the nice thing about having a sort of global audience, if you want to call it that, is that people can tune it at any time. Generally, I try to do it around in the world of Eastern Standard Time, but it's not always possible. But I have lots of other content going on too, and then my other team, they will upload cool content. So Go Nitro content is put up here, but this is just something I really enjoy doing, being able to just talk about things that are of interest to me and presumably to others, because people are commenting, which I think is fantastic, and just being able to go into some of the synthesizer and music stuff. And one of the things that I am going to do, as there have been some people that have been asking me about it, the music for Go Nitro, yes, I do write the music for it, and we are starting to go into season 3, where the music is being recorded. So what I'm actually going to be doing is I'm going to be chronicling a lot of the audio design and stuff for the 3rd season of Go Nitro for U.S. syndication on Fox, CBS, ABC, NBC, CW, and I'm going to be putting some behind the scenes as we do those, so you can kind of follow along and see how we make a national U.S. network or a syndicated show. For those of you that might be interested. And I'm also going to do some tutorials on how we do some of the graphical and musical and sound things that we do, because I have been getting people asking about it, and I know a lot of other TV producers don't give a shit, and I give a shit, and I think it's cool that people are asking, and I think that it's cool that people are engaged. And if I can help out a little bit in some way, or if you're just enjoying the content and seeing how a TV show is made behind the scenes, please, by all means, watch and subscribe if you haven't already. And, feel free to hijack my live stream and ask me something, even if it's off topic, because I do see them and I do remember them. And these are things that I really enjoy, and I make a note of them. And if I can make an interesting video about it, or I can tell an interesting story, I really enjoy doing that.
I really enjoy being it. Because TV, strict old school TV, if you want to call it that, is a one-way medium in the traditional sense. I consider TV, Amazon, whatever, but I mean, if we're talking about strict sit in front appointment television, it's one way. So when you watch ESPN, you can't interact. I mean, you could do a tweet and maybe they'll feature it, but you can't speak in real time to whoever it is that is live streaming. But the cool thing about Twitch and the cool thing about Twitch and YouTube and Facebook Live and Instagram Live and all that jazz is that you can. And that's one of the things that I really enjoy about it, that I can get feedback and I can talk to you, and it's really cool, and I really enjoy it. So if you are curious about Go Nitro and any of the sports-related stuff, check your local listings to see the TV show, and you can also see clips and find out more about the show at www.gonitro.tv. Don't have a graphic made up yet for Lower Thirds, but I will have one made up for tomorrow or the day after, because I will plug it again. And if any of you are curious about the company itself, you can go to www.skycron.com and see more about the company there. So I think that's pretty much going to do it for tonight. So what I'll do is I will leave it there and have yourself a great night. Bye now. I thought you might want to see this clip again. I think it's pretty cool. There we go. This never gets old, seeing Brittany do this three-pointer. This is just epic. I have the sound off here because you heard it before. That is just such an unbelievable shot. Did you get that? Anyway, have a good night.